As I'm writing this, it's exactly 1:03 a.m., and I don't think I'll be sleeping tonight. I'm currently living with my grandmother, who has been a widow for a few years now. After my grandfather passed away, my parents and I, tried convincing her to move in with us. She refused, flat out. She said she wanted to stay in the house they built together, way out on the outskirts of the city, in the same place they'd shared a life for over 40 years. She's old-fashioned like that. Stubborn too. And I understand it in a way. That house is full of memories. Pictures still hang on the walls from the 80s. My grandfather's tools are still neatly arranged in the shed, like he might come back and use them at any moment. She always said, "When my time comes, I want to go right here, just like your grandfather did." So I moved in with her a few months ago to help out, make sure she had company, keep the place maintained, and just generally be around in case anything happened. The house itself isn't scary during the day. In fact, it's beautiful. Nestled between two rolling hills with tall grass and sun-bleached wood fences, it looks like something out of a country postcard. The wind smells like pine and earth. The only neighbors are a few miles away, and there's something undeniably peaceful about the isolation. But when night falls, that peace shifts. There's no light pollution out here. No street lamps, no city glow, just darkness. The kind of darkness you don't really see in towns or cities anymore. The only artificial light comes from a single utility pole installed years ago at the edge of the gravel driveway, and the motion sensor lights outside the living room door. But tonight, Grandma had turned those off before going to bed. She always says they waste electricity if you leave them on all night. I didn't argue, she was already asleep, and I had a few online assignments to finish for school. Nothing big, just catching up on discussion posts and one late essay. I made a cup of coffee and settled into the couch in the living room with my laptop. It was quiet, almost too quiet. You see, I'm used to the ambient sounds out here. Crickets, the occasional owl, even the wind pushing through the tall grass. But tonight, it was like everything had stopped. There was a stillness pressing against the house, like the world was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Scratch. A slow, deliberate scraping sound, metal against metal. It came from the front of the house. Another scratch, heavier this time, like something pressing against the screen door. At first I froze. The sound was so clear, so close. I muted my laptop out of instinct and listened. The scraping continued, steady and unnatural. It wasn't like twigs in the wind. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like something was trying to get in. My heart was thudding now. I slowly looked toward the door, but I couldn't see anything past the curtain. Outside, it was pitch black. No porch lights, no moonlight. Just that one old utility pole off in the distance, barely illuminating the driveway. We don't have any bushes or trees near the front door. Nothing that could be brushing up against it like that. The landscaping is just open ground and gravel. Nothing close enough to make that kind of noise. And here's the thing. That sound wasn't just scratching. There was weight behind it. Like something leaning against the screen, testing it, pressing into the mesh like it knew I was inside. Like it was listening for movement. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stared at the glow of my laptop screen, too afraid to look up again, too afraid to make a sound. But I could feel it. Something was watching me, not just from outside the door, but through it, as if the darkness itself had grown eyes. It lasted for maybe 20-30 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. Then the scratching stopped. Just silence again. No retreating footsteps, no scampering, no rustling in the grass. Just the same suffocating stillness that had blanketed everything earlier. I sat there paralyzed, heart pounding in my ears. I don't know how long I waited, maybe 10 minutes, maybe more, before I finally felt brave enough to move. I didn't look out the window. I didn't check the door. I just slowly stood up, laptop clutched in my hand like a shield, and tiptoed to my room. I locked the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, the silence still deafening. Eventually, I texted my parents. Something was outside the house tonight, scratching the screen door. I don't know what it was. Grandma's asleep. I locked my room. I'll explain more in the morning. I didn't get a reply. They were probably asleep. Now, before you assume, Yes, I know there are animals out here. Raccoons, possums, even the occasional fox. We've seen them scurry across the yard at dusk, looking for food, or chasing lizards that climb the walls in the summer. But here's the thing. We don't have bears here. They're not native to this region, never have been. There's nothing that large that would try and press into a screen door like that. Nothing that would remain dead silent after being heard. And even raccoons or foxes don't watch you. They scurry, they knock over trash cans, they make a ruckus and leave. This was something else. Something calculated, like it wanted me to hear it, like it was waiting for me to come to the door. And now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, still standing just beyond the reach of the window, just past the darkness, watching. I keep glancing toward the door. The motion lights are still off. My hand is hovering above the switch, but I don't want to flip it, because some part of me is terrified of what I'll see if I do. If I survive the night, I'll ask Grandma tomorrow if she's ever heard something like that before. But part of me already knows the answer. This place, it's not just isolated, it's watched. And tonight, something came close. Too close. I was 12 when I decided I wanted to make a little money of my own. At that age, you don't think about taxes or real jobs. You just want some pocket change to spend on candy or whatever random junk seems important. Babysitting was the easiest way for me to do that. My neighbors trusted me, and since I lived in a quiet little cul-de-sac, parents figured nothing bad could ever happen around here. One family in particular, just a few houses down from mine, hired me regularly. They had a little girl we'll call Sally. Her parents worked long hours, often late into the night, so I'd come over after dinner, play with Sally, and tuck her into bed before waiting for her parents to return. Honestly, it became routine, comfortable, almost boring. But one night, everything changed. That evening felt normal at first. I walked over to their house just as the streetlights flickered on, carrying my backpack with a few coloring books and snacks. The air was crisp, a little colder than usual, and the houses along the block looked like they were holding their breath. Lights off, curtains drawn, like the whole neighborhood had turned in early. Inside, things were warm and bright. Sally ran to me right away, her little feet slapping against the wooden floor as she squealed my name. She was always energetic, always smiling. For a while, we just played in the living room. Dolls, puzzles, the usual games, until it was time to start winding down. That's when I decided to get her a bedtime snack. She loved crackers before bed, so I scooped her up in my arms and headed toward the kitchen. The moment I flipped the switch and turned off the living room light, the house seemed to change. The warm brightness gave way to heavy shadows that clung to the walls and corners, the kind of shadows that made the silence feel thicker. My footsteps echoed louder than they should have, as I carried Sally down the short hallway toward the kitchen. And that's when it happened. Sally's little hand, which had been loosely hooked around my neck, suddenly lifted. Her tiny finger stretched out into the darkness of the living room we just left. Her voice was soft but steady. "Who's that tall man?" At first I froze, thinking she was joking. Kids say weird things all the time, and she'd been on a princess kick that week, making up imaginary characters, inventing stories. But there was something about the way she said it that made my skin prickle. It wasn't playful, it wasn't a giggle, it was matter of fact, like she was describing something that was standing right there. I turned my head slowly, heart pounding in my ears. The living room was dark now, but not completely. A faint orange glow from the street lamp outside seeped in through the blinds. My eyes strained against the gloom, searching. At first, nothing. Just furniture, the outline of toys scattered on the floor. And then, I saw him. At the far end of the room, just beyond the glow, was a shape, a figure. He was tall, unnaturally tall. His head nearly grazed the ceiling, his shoulders broad. He wasn't moving at first, just standing, watching. My breath caught in my throat. For a second, I told myself it was just a shadow, some trick of the streetlight bending through the curtains. But then, As if my fear had called him to life, he stepped forward. The floor creaked beneath his weight. Sally clung tighter to me, burying her face in my shoulder. My legs locked, but every instinct screamed to run. His steps were slow, deliberate, closing the space between us one measured movement at a time. I don't even remember making the decision. One moment I was frozen, the next I was sprinting. My feet pounded against the hallway floor as I bolted toward the front door. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I knew was that if I hesitated, if I gave him even a second to catch up, something terrible would happen. I burst through the front door into the night air, nearly tripping over the porch steps as I clutched Sally against me. My lungs burned, my chest ached, but I ran faster than I ever had in my life, all the way down the street to my own house. When I threw open the door, my mom was sitting in the living room watching TV. She looked up, startled as I stumbled inside, breathless and pale, still holding Sally. I tried to explain. The man, the shadows, the way he followed us, but the words tangled in my mouth. My mom's face shifted from alarm to disbelief. She shook her head, told me I was imagining things. "You spooked yourself," she said. "Houses feel different in the dark. That's all." But I knew what I saw. I knew what Sally saw. And that night, I refused to let her out of my arms until her parents came home. Now listen, the scariest part? A few days later, I learned the truth. There had been a man in the house that night. He wasn't a ghost or a shadow trick or some figment of a child's imagination. He was real. Sally's parents told my mom he had broken in through the back door. He stole a few valuables, jewelry, electronics, and their family cat, just carried it out of the house with him. But I still remember the way Sally whispered, "Who's that tall man?" in the dark hallway. The way his footsteps echoed as he moved closer. The way my body locked with terror before instinct kicked in. That was the night I learned monsters don't always hide under your bed. Sometimes they're standing right in front of you, watching, waiting. It was around 3:30 a.m. on November 15, 2023. I was sitting on my living room couch, half watching grown-ups, trying to unwind after a long, exhausting day. The house was quiet, too quiet, like the walls themselves are holding their breath. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the building settling, even the soft sound of my own breathing. And then I heard it. Breathing, slow, deliberate, just outside my front door. I froze mid-bite of popcorn, my stomach dropping into my knees. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a stray animal. But then the doorknob started turning, slowly, at first barely noticeable, like a whisper. Then it twisted with more force, and the door began to push open. My chest constricted. My heart slammed against my rib cage as if it wanted to break free. I didn't hesitate. I bolted upstairs, my knife in hand, the one I keep in the TV drawer for moments exactly like this. Every step felt heavy, slow, even as my adrenaline surged. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. What if they broke the glass? What if someone entered the house while I was unarmed? I live in a low-income area, in a small 2-story loft with no security cameras. My upstairs doesn't even have a door. It's an open area, completely exposed. There was nowhere to hide. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering frantically. "Someone's outside my house, trying to break in," I told the operator, my voice trembling despite my best effort to stay quiet. The doorknob continued to scrape and twist below me. Every sound of the door, every little push against its frame, made me flinch. The operator stayed calm, telling me that the police were on their way, but minutes felt like hours. I could hear the faint scrape of the door, the push, the subtle shift in the air. My body was taut with fear, every sense on overdrive. The sounds didn't stop. At one point, I thought I heard a footstep, or maybe it was my imagination. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. My mind jumped to every worst-case scenario. An armed intruder, a crazy person, someone who had been watching me. I didn't know. I only knew that I felt completely vulnerable. trapped in my own home. Finally, the noises ceased, or at least paused. I stayed upstairs, eyes darting to the window, peering out into the darkness. The street outside was empty, silent, normal, or so it seemed. I wanted to breathe, but even then, I couldn't relax. Every shadow, every movement outside sent a jolt of fear through me. 20 minutes later, the cops arrived. Blue and red lights flashed across the walls of my loft. I ran downstairs to meet them, hands shaking, knife still in hand. They asked if I was on drugs. I assured them I was completely sober. I had been at a basketball game earlier, hadn't smoked or done anything. Drank lightly maybe 3 times a week. My body shook too much for them to see that this fear was real. They did a perimeter check, shrugged, and left. And their suggestion? Don't stay in the house that night and try to get a good look at the intruder next time. I wanted to scream. How could they not understand? I was right there. Adam Sandler was still on TV. Someone had tried to get in. Someone had been right there in my house. After the cops left, my body went into full panic mode. My chest heaved, my hands trembled. I fainted from the intensity of the adrenaline, the shock, the fear. It was like my body couldn't process what had just happened. I didn't sleep all night. I stayed in the dark, replaying every scrape of the knob, every push of the door, every breath I thought I had heard outside. Every little sound, real or imagined, became magnified in my mind. By morning, I forced myself outside. The yard was a mess, trash was scattered everywhere, probably knocked over by stray cats. But no sign of anyone breaking in. The house looked normal, silent, empty. And yet, I couldn't shake the memory of the door, the knob, the deliberate breathing. I've been staying at my mom's house for the past couple of days. I haven't slept more than 46 hours. I'm a relatively happy, lonely 23-year-old guy. But my mental health isn't perfect. I've never been diagnosed with anything, but this experience has shaken me to my core. Could it have been a hallucination? Am I imagining things? Maybe, but the fear was real, and so was the threat I felt. I keep replaying it over and over. Someone tried to break into my home. They could have gotten in if I hadn't locked the door in time. The thought of what might have happened if I were asleep, distracted, or unarmed is terrifying. My home, the one place I should feel safest, suddenly felt exposed, unsafe, and fragile. And I'll never forget that sound. The breathing outside my door, the turning of the knob, the push of the door, the terrifying thought that someone or something was just inches away from stepping inside my home. I'll be on edge for a long time, and every time I hear a creak, every time a door moves, my mind goes right back to that night. The night someone tried to break into my house at 3 a.m. It was late, so late that even the insects had grown quiet, and the only sound left in the night was the cold wind threading its way through the skeletal trees lining the old dirt road. I found myself walking that road alone, bundled in a too-thin jacket, the chill air biting at my exposed skin. The wind carried with it the scent of wet leaves and distant smoke, maybe from someone's fireplace, or maybe something else. The moon was hidden behind a thick veil of clouds, leaving the world in near total darkness. My only light came from my phone's flashlight, flickering every so often like it too was nervous about what lay ahead. The narrow beam barely reached more than a few feet, but it was better than nothing. I walked carefully, each step crunching against gravel and frost-bitten leaves, the sound far louder than it should have been in the eerie stillness. Every now and then, a rustle in the woods would make my skin crawl. Quick bursts of movement in the underbrush, too erratic to be just wind. The occasional groan of tree branches shifting above me felt like whispers from the shadows, and my imagination began to toy with me. Was something pacing me through the woods? I tried to brush off the unease, telling myself it was probably just raccoons or deer, but that didn't make me feel any better. Then I heard it, faint at first, just a distant hum, almost drowned out by the wind. But as the seconds passed, it grew clearer. An engine, a vehicle. It was coming from behind. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the glow of headlights weaving through the trees in the distance. The car wasn't speeding. It was crawling, Its engine rumbled low, steady, almost purposeful. The way it moved set my teeth on edge. There was no reason for anyone to be out here at this hour. This wasn't a through road, just a long, isolated stretch that curved around the old quarry and ended near my house. I slowed, hoping maybe the car would pass, but as it got closer, it began to match my pace. It didn't honk, didn't flash its lights, it just rolled forward slowly, deliberately, like it was studying me. My throat tightened. The primal part of my brain whispered that something was wrong, horribly wrong. I picked up my pace, forcing my legs to move faster, my breath clouding in front of me. Still, the vehicle followed. The crunch of tires against gravel became a metronome of dread. Not speeding, not overtaking, just following, like a predator stalking a wounded deer. I didn't want to look back. Every instinct told me not to, but that only made the fear worse. The unknown behind me became a living thing. Every hair on my body stood on end. I gripped my phone tighter, turned on the selfie camera, and tilted it slightly behind me, praying to catch some glimpse without having to turn around. What I saw nearly made me drop the phone. There was a figure. Someone was leaning halfway out of the passenger window, their face half covered by a hood. But the outline of what they held was unmistakable. A shotgun, long, dark, and deadly. They weren't just following me, they were hunting. My pulse exploded in my ears. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't run. It was as if the air itself had turned to glue. But something deep inside me said not to run, not to make myself a moving target, not yet. Instead, I kept walking, as calm as I could manage. My legs moved, but everything else felt numb. Every second stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap. I kept the phone angled behind me, but the reflection was dark now. The person had ducked back inside the vehicle. I didn't know where they were watching from anymore. A single misstep, a stumble, a wrong glance, and I felt like it would be over. Then something strange happened. A second car appeared. Far down the road ahead, small headlights in the distance, slowly approaching. Relief flooded my chest, but almost instantly I realized I was caught between two vehicles. The one behind didn't speed up. The one ahead was still too far to make out clearly. Panic rose in me again, but this time I didn't stop to analyze it. My house wasn't far. Maybe half a mile. I turned off my flashlight to make myself less visible and move faster. I stayed to the side of the road, hoping the cover of trees would help. Behind me, the car kept its distance, but never turned, never slowed. Its headlights remained steady, unwavering. The second vehicle passed me, thankfully just a random driver, too preoccupied to notice the pale, terrified figure on the roadside. They kept going and I cursed quietly under my breath. Now it was just me and them again. I could see the old wooden fence near my property now, just a little farther. Then, finally, I saw the outline of my home. My porch light was on, just barely visible through the fog of my breath and the edge of the trees. I broke into a sprint. I didn't care if they saw me run anymore. I just needed to get inside. I heard the engine rev once behind me. Tires crunched louder, faster. I didn't look back. I ran up the steps, fingers fumbling with the keys. They slipped once, twice. I cursed loudly, shoved the right one into the lock, twisted, and threw the door open. I slammed it behind me and locked everything. Deadbolt, chain, handle. I even shoved a chair under the knob. Then I collapsed to the floor, gasping. My heart wouldn't stop pounding. My ears strained to hear anything over my ragged breathing. But nothing. The car didn't follow up the driveway. It just vanished. Maybe they peeled away. Maybe they parked somewhere nearby. I didn't know. I just knew I was inside and alive. I stayed awake until dawn, a kitchen knife in my hand, jumping at every creak of the house. It wasn't until 2 days later that I saw the news. A local station reported a string of bizarre, brutal incidents on back roads in the area. Late-night walkers, slow-moving cars, victims shot in the head, each one after reportedly turning to confront whoever was following them. Police were baffled. No patterns, no suspects, just a chilling consistency in the reports. The moment someone looked back, they died. And suddenly I understood what had saved me. It wasn't luck. It was instinct. I didn't turn around. So if you ever find yourself walking alone down a desolate road and a car starts to follow and you feel that itch between your shoulder blades, that gnawing urge to look back, don't. Just keep walking and pray they get bored, because the moment you make eye contact, it's already too late. When I was in high school, I babysat for some families in my neighborhood to make some extra money. I was pretty close with the kids since I had been babysitting them for years. One night, I get a text saying they were a friend of one of the families I babysit for. Let's call them Jane. Hey, it's Jane blank gave me your number. Would you be able to babysit for a couple hours Saturday night at 8? She asked me, and I agree, and she gives me the address. Although they live pretty far, I stick to my word. Saturday night rolls around and I take a bus to get there. I live in a pretty small town and am familiar with most of the roads, but for some reason this home was hard to find. I walk down the gravel driveway and am met with Jane, who had already been waiting for me at the door. I greet her. The home is cold and dark but spacious. The floorboards creaked under us while she showed me around and gave me clear instructions. No TV after 8:30. Claire is 9 now, so I expect her to follow instructions. But if you could make sure she's in bed before 9, that would be great. She leads me into the kitchen to show me where the snacks were in case I got hungry. When we get into the kitchen, I spot something in the corner of my eye. Something was peeking at me at the end of the corridor. I look over to see that it's a little girl wearing a red dress. That must be Claire, I say. Oh, you must be special. She rarely ever comes out of her room anymore. I glance at the same spot again, and the girl was gone. When the mother leaves, I walk up the stairs to say hi to Claire. Her door is locked, so I knock lightly. Soft classical music is playing, so I leave her alone for a while. I'm a very nosy person, so I took the opportunity to look around the old house. It was pretty big. There were so many hidden nooks and doors. After a while of exploring, I look at the time. It's 8:47. I should make sure Claire is getting ready for bed. I walk back up the stairs, but before I can get to the top, the little girl is sitting on the steps. It's bedtime, Claire, I say, but no response. She doesn't move or say anything. Then I hear the bedroom door open. Hi, you must be my new babysitter, says a girl wearing a purple pajama set. I look back down, and the girl on the steps isn't there anymore. In complete confusion, I say, I think your sister's playing hide and seek. Claire looks at me confused and says, I don't have a sister. At this point, I'm completely freaked out. I laugh it off and tuck her into bed and go back downstairs. Jane didn't mention having another child either. Who was the little girl? At this point, I must be going crazy. I watch some TV downstairs to clear my head. I put something random on, making sure it's on a low volume. Around 11:30, I hear crunching in the kitchen as if someone had been eating cooking in the pantry. I expect that it's Claire who had snuck out of her room for a late-night snack. When I walk into the kitchen, the pantry door is open with a Chips Ahoy box on the floor with tons of crumbs. But no Claire. I find a broom in the corner and begin sweeping up the mess. Claire, no sneaking food, it's bedtime, I say. While sweeping the last few cookie bits, I hear a faint giggle behind me. I bolt around and see a trail of crumbs down the dark corridor, and at the end of the trail was the girl in the red dress. At this point, I know I'm not insane. She was really standing a couple meters away from me. Fuck this, I murmur. I slowly place the broom back in the corner. She's still standing there, giggling from time to time, which felt like a fucking lifetime. After a few seconds, she turns and runs into the living room. I stay in the kitchen until the mom comes home, and I don't bother telling her anything I needed to get out of that house. She pays me and I bolt out of there so fast. I am never babysitting for her again. It had been a stressful few months. City noise, endless notifications, jobs that drain the life out of us. So when I suggested a weekend getaway to my family's old log cabin deep in the woods, everyone jumped on board. No phones, no social media, just 5 friends, a fireplace, and a quiet place to breathe. The cabin was about 20 miles outside the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest and far from the sounds of civilization. It had been in my family for decades, passed down from my grandfather, who had built it himself after retiring. I hadn't been there in years, but I remembered it fondly, peaceful, isolated, and rustic. We were supposed to land by noon, but our flight got delayed for hours due to a heavy storm system rolling through. Rain lashed at the airport windows, thunder cracked like gunfire. It was late afternoon by the time we finally touched down. Tired and hungry, we met at a Taco Bell across from the airport to regroup. Our rental car was ready, bags packed in the trunk, and we were finally on our way into the woods by dusk. By the time we reached the cabin, darkness had completely swallowed the forest. The only light came from the car's headlights slicing through mist and trees. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires as we pulled up to the old wooden cabin. It looked just like I remembered. Weathered logs, a sloping green roof, the porch light flickering weakly in the wind. But as soon as I stepped inside, a chill swept over me. Not the nostalgic kind, a literal, bone-deep cold. The place was absolutely freezing, the kind of cold that seeps into your clothes and nestles in your spine. I figured it was just from being unoccupied for so long, so I went searching for the thermostat. I finally found it tucked in the corner of the master bedroom, partially hidden behind a dusty bookshelf. I turned the dial and waited. Nothing. I pressed the buttons, toggled the switch, still nothing. The heat was dead. We bundled up in hoodies and blankets, but the temperature only dropped further as night fell. Our breath fogged in the air inside the cabin. A few of my friends started talking about calling it off and heading to a hotel back in town. I didn't want to give up just yet. The whole point was to unplug and rough it a bit, right? Eventually, I convinced my closest friend, Mark, to come with me into town to buy a space heater. The rest of the group stayed behind, bundled around a few candles and trying to warm their hands over mugs of lukewarm tea. The nearest town was about 45 minutes away. The drive was long, dark, and filled with uneasy silence. We barely saw another car. When we finally reached a hardware store, it was close to closing time, but they let us in. We grabbed the biggest portable heater they had and some extension cords just in case. We got back to the cabin about 2 hours later. It was almost 10 p.m. Everyone looked half frozen and miserable. I plugged the heater into the outlet in the living room, and within a couple of hours, the place started to thaw. We all relaxed a little, finally laughing again, shaking off the tension. By 11 p.m., we were ready to crash. I curled up on the small bed in the guest room and pulled the covers tight. The hum of the heater in the next room was the only sound, a comforting low buzz that let me drift off. Until I woke up. The cold was back. I sat up, breath fogging in the air. My nose was numb. Something was wrong. I got out of bed and tiptoed into the living room. The heater was dark, dead, no hum, no warmth. I walked closer and that's when I saw it. The power cord had been cut clean in half. Not frayed, not chewed. Clean like someone had taken a knife or shears to it. My stomach turned. I looked around the room half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows, but everything was still. I woke Mark and told him. We went room to room asking the others if anyone had touched the heater or seen anything. No one knew what I was talking about. They all swore they'd been asleep the whole time. Trying to stay calm, I started checking things more thoroughly. That's when I remembered the vents. Maybe there was some blockage, or maybe the wiring was messed up. I knelt by one of the floor vents and unscrewed the cover to take a peek inside. And that's when I saw him, a face inches from mine. I froze, my blood turned to ice. In the vent, wedged into the tight crawl space beneath the floorboards, was a man. Filthy pale, his eyes wide open and unblinking. His face was streaked with dirt and his lips were cracked and dry. And he was staring straight at me. We held eye contact for half a second too long before I slammed the vent shut, heart exploding in my chest. I turned and sprinted down the hall, yelling for everyone to get up now. There wasn't time to explain, just pure adrenaline-fueled panic. Everyone scrambled to get their things. We were throwing clothes into bags, grabbing phones and wallets, running for the door. Then we heard it, a loud, thunderous bang from inside the walls. Then another. Then came the scream, a long, inhuman screech like something being torn in half. It echoed through the cabin, vibrating through the wooden floorboards and walls. The man was screaming at the top of his lungs, slamming his fists against the inside of the walls like he was trying to break free or keep us from leaving. We ran. No one said a word. We grabbed our bags and bolted to the car. As soon as we were inside, I locked the doors and peeled out of the driveway, gravel flying behind us. We called the police as soon as we reached town. They didn't take long to respond. A team of officers was dispatched to the cabin that same night. We waited at a local diner until they called us back. They had found him. The man had been living in the crawl space beneath the cabin for who knows how long. He'd set up a kind of nest with blankets, stolen food wrappers, and a small flashlight. They told us he was mentally unstable and had been evading law enforcement for months. He had no ID, no family, no explanation. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the police department. They had retrieved surveillance footage from the cabin, something I didn't even know existed. Turns out my grandfather had set up a few hidden security cameras years ago and forgotten about them. I clicked the link and watched in silence. First, the man crawling out of the vent after we fell asleep. Then him in the kitchen, cutting the power cord to the heater. Then, the worst part, him standing silently over us as we slept, watching us for hours. At one point, he opened my backpack, pulled out a hoodie, and sniffed it before gently folding it and putting it back. I couldn't watch anymore. I closed the laptop and vomited in the sink. I never went back to the cabin after that. I had it boarded up and later sold it off completely. I don't even like going near the woods now. To this day, I still get chills thinking about that man. How long had he been living under the floor? How many other nights had he watched people sleep? And the worst question of all, what would have happened if I hadn't opened that vent? The first knock came at 2 a.m. By the third, I realized we weren't alone. So my story begins a few years ago. In the fall or early winter of 2019, we were staying with my husband's father. We had rented a house and were planning to move in permanently a couple of months later. But at the time this happened, we had been there less than a week. I slept in the living room on an air mattress with our 3 children, ages 10, 5, and 18 months, snuggled close. The house itself was strange in its design. The kitchen, dining room, and living room were all part of one wide open space. A counter divided the kitchen from the living area, a sort of makeshift bar with a sink on the kitchen side. My father-in-law never used it for sitting. He kept the sofa pressed right up against it. The kitchen side had storage for dishes and all sorts of odds and ends. On either side of the counter, there were 4 or 5 feet of empty space, creating this awkward open gap that made the living area feel unusually exposed. Along the wall directly opposite the front door were 3 doors. First, my father-in-law's bedroom, then the bathroom, then a small spare room. My husband slept on the tiny spare bed. His father kept his bedroom door closed almost always, and there was usually a TV on in the room, plus either a space heater, window AC unit, or at least a fan humming somewhere. I don't remember whether my husband had his door open or closed that night. The rest of the house was all windows. Floor-to-ceiling glass ran along the front, and sliding windows stretched along each side wall. The house had originally been built as a sort of getaway cabin, designed to let in light in the view. My father-in-law disagreed with that design and was in the process of building a front porch, planning to replace about half of the windows with walls. At this point, the porch was still under construction, and the windows remained as they had been, large, tall, and completely transparent. It was the kind of place where you felt connected to the outside even when you were inside, and at the same time, completely exposed, with no way to tell who might be lurking outside. That night, I lay on the air mattress, holding the youngest child, with the older 2 on either side. We had all been asleep for hours when I woke up. I didn't know why, I just felt alert, uneasy, almost like my body was sensing something I couldn't see. The house was mostly quiet. The occasional hum of the heater or the soft whir of the fan was the only background noise. Everyone else was asleep. I lay there listening to the subtle creaks of the house settling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just one of those nights, a normal sleep cycle thing. I was about to drift back off when it happened. A knock, not a frantic banging, not a desperate pounding, a clear, deliberate knock on the front door. My heart skipped. I didn't move. I lay there frozen, gripping the small child in my arms. The door was across the living room, on the other side of the counter. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to leave my children exposed or wake anyone. It was cold outside, cozy and warm inside, and it wasn't even my house. The knock came again and again, each time slow and controlled, echoing faintly in the open space. My chest tightened. No one called out. No phone rang. The air felt heavy. I didn't want to look, didn't want to move, but I couldn't stop my ears from straining toward the sound. Then I heard footsteps, someone walking on the unfinished porch. Tools and boards had been stacked against the house, yet these steps were careful, deliberate. No clatters, no thuds, just the sound of someone moving around the construction materials with awareness. Precision. My stomach twisted, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The night suddenly seemed darker, the air heavier, the shadows sharper. Then started tapping. A slow, deliberate tapping at the window nearest to the air mattress. Floor-to-ceiling glass, and no way to see who was outside. The tapping was steady, almost ritualistic, echoing faintly off the walls. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The sound seemed to stretch time itself, each tap echoing in the hollow quiet of the night. My stomach knotted. My pulse thrummed in my ears. The children shifted slightly in their sleep, but didn't wake. The house was silent except for the tapping and the distant creak of the old building. Each tap slow, deliberate, like someone counting or measuring. The rhythm grew in my mind until it felt almost alive, watching me, mocking me. I wanted to scream, but the thought of waking my children kept me frozen. I pressed the toddler closer to my chest, whispering in my head for them to stay asleep, to not stir. Finally, the tapping stopped. My body relaxed for a fraction of a second, too short to truly feel safe. Then footsteps moved again, away from the window across the porch. And that's when I heard it, walking across sheets of tin. I know that sound. I know it perfectly. And I know beyond any shadow of a doubt what I didn't realize until morning. The only sheets of tin on the porch were already installed as a roof over the porch. There were no loose sheets anywhere near the stacked boards or tools. The only way anyone could have walked there, the only way they could have made that noise, was if they had climbed up onto the roof itself, walked along the tin, and then jumped or swung back down to the porch edge. Even now, every time I think about it, it terrifies me. The idea of someone or something moving across that roof, unseen, outside the clear, exposed windows where we slept, it makes my skin crawl. The silence after the tapping was just as heavy as the sound itself, filling the house with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. And that's why I'm writing this now. Perhaps that's also why, just as I type this, an owl let out a long, chilling, un-owl-like cry before settling back into its usual eerie coos. It's as if the night itself remembers. As a small business owner, the holiday season is both a blessing and a curse. The revenue makes the year, but the stress? It's like living in a snow globe constantly being shaken. I run a modest souvenir shop in town, mostly handcrafted trinkets, local artisan goods, and some kitschy but charming holiday-themed items. Since December 1st, I hadn't had a single day off. My employees did their best, but as always, it fell on me to handle the brunt of the work: inventory, accounts, restocking, decorations, customer complaints, last-minute orders. Christmas Eve was no exception. That night, I let my staff go home early. They had families to return to, kids to tuck in, dinners to host. Me? I was single, and with most of my family long moved away or estranged, I didn't mind the quiet. Honestly, I found some peace in the silence. It was just past 11:45 p.m., and I was in the back office, hunched over a stack of invoices and tally sheets, nursing the last of my lukewarm coffee. Outside, snow was falling steadily, blanketing the parking lot in a soft white hush. That's when I heard it, a knock at the front door. Not a gentle tap, not the wind rattling the glass. A deliberate, steady knock. I looked at the clock again. Nearly midnight. We'd been closed for almost 4 hours. Who in their right mind would be out now, in this weather? I figured maybe it was someone stranded or in need of directions. I got up, rubbed my eyes, and walked through the dim shop toward the entrance. My boots echoed lightly against the hardwood floor. The motion sensor lights at the front flickered on. That's when I saw him. Standing in front of the glass door was a man dressed as Santa Claus, but not the cheerful department store kind. His suit was wrinkled and stained. The white fur trim was matted and gray in spots. The fake beard hung lopsided, exposing pale, cracked lips beneath. His eyes were the first thing that truly unsettled me. Too wide, too alert, like someone on the edge of something dangerous. I slowly opened the inner vestibule door, but left the main entrance locked. I gestured politely. "Sorry, we're closed for the night." The man didn't smile. "I forgot my wallet," he said flatly. "Left it in your store. Need to come in and get it." His voice was deep and raspy, and there was something oddly rehearsed about the way he said it, like he had practiced it. I frowned. We didn't find any wallet during cleanup, and no one reported one missing. I glanced at him again. "I don't think I saw you in here today, sir." He shook his head, lips twitching slightly. "I was here. I left it on the counter." I hesitated. There was no way he had been in my shop. I knew all the customers that came in today, regulars mostly. And this man, I would have remembered him. "I'll double-check the back," I offered, mostly to buy time. I didn't like the look in his eyes. Too intense, too focused. I walked back to the lost and found Ben near the register, flipping through the usual forgotten scarves, a mitten, a child's toy dinosaur. No wallet, nothing new. When I returned to the front, he was still standing there, now visibly agitated. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing here. If we find it, I'll hold it at the counter and call you if you leave a number." His demeanor changed instantly. The corners of his mouth twisted downward in an ugly scowl. He yanked hard on the door handle. The glass vibrated in the frame. "I need it tonight. Let me in." His voice was no longer patient or flat. It was demanding, sharp. I raised my hand to calm the situation. "Sir, I really need you to leave. I'm the only one here, and if you keep pulling on the door, I'll have to call the police." His eyes darkened. He bared his teeth, and what he said next chilled the air more than the snow outside. "If you don't open this door right now, I'm going to kill you." That was enough. I stepped back, grabbed the shop phone, and started dialing. I looked up. He was gone. No figure in red, no shadow. Nothing but falling snow beyond the glass. My breath caught in my throat. The silence suddenly felt unnatural, oppressive. I waited a few seconds, listening. Nothing. I didn't end up calling the cops. I just stood there, heart pounding, then slowly went back to the office. I locked the inner door behind me, just in case. Around 1 a.m., I finished the paperwork, packed up my bag, and finally got ready to head home. I checked outside through the window, just one car in the lot. Mine. No sign of Santa. The snowfall had thickened, muffling the world in white. I wrapped my coat tighter and stepped outside, locking the door behind me. Halfway to my car, I saw them. Footprints, fresh ones, heading from the lot toward my vehicle. They were deep, heavy, and unaccompanied by any others. No return path. I stopped cold. The hairs on my arms stood straight. The footprints led to my driver's side door, then disappeared. And then, behind the frost-lined windows, I saw it. A glimpse of red. The top of a Santa hat. Someone was in the back seat. My eyes met his. His face was pressed low against the window, peering at me through the glass like an animal in wait. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then he grinned. I bolted. I didn't look back, not at first. My feet slipped in the snow, lungs burning as I sprinted to the shop. I fumbled with my keys, finally got the door open, slammed it shut, and locked it just as he reached it. He crashed into the glass with a snarl, palms slapping the window. He started pulling at the handle again, harder than before. His eyes were wide with fury now, and spit flew from his mouth as he screamed, "Open this door! I'll rip out your intestines!" His voice was raw, cracked with rage. He slammed his fist on the glass so hard I thought it would break. It spiderwebbed in the corner. I dove for the phone and dialed the cops with trembling fingers. My voice cracked as I explained what was happening. They said a patrol car was nearby and would be there in minutes. For the next 5 minutes, I stood behind the counter, clutching the phone like a lifeline, watching the door. Santa never stopped staring. He paced, he yelled, he whispered things I couldn't hear, breathing heavily against the glass. Then the red and blue lights lit up the snow. He tried to run, didn't get far. The officers tackled him in the lot, shoved him face down in the snow. Even then, he screamed nonsense about reindeer, about someone named Krampus, about how I had ruined the holiday. As they drove away with him in the back seat, I glanced at my watch. 3 a.m. "Merry Christmas to me," I muttered, locking the door once more. And this time, I didn't unlock it again until morning. I'm a male, 26 years old, and this happened around 3 years ago, when the US was practically recovering from COVID. I used to live in Long Island, New York, and that's where this story unfolds. It's one of those places that feels familiar and safe, the kind of suburban stretch where everyone knows everyone, or at least thinks they do. But that night, that illusion of safety was completely shattered. A little context. For those who didn't grow up in New York, there's a massive railroad system that connects nearly every town to the city, stretching all the way up to Manhattan. When I took a business opportunity in the city, I had no choice but to rely on it daily. I'd wake up before sunrise around 5:30 a.m. to catch the 6 a.m. train, and some nights I wouldn't get home until close to 11 p.m. It was exhausting, grueling, and at times monotonous, but the routine was steady, predictable. Before this job, I'd rarely been on the train during those late hours. And as I quickly realized, the late-night crowd was almost always the same. The same faces, the same brief nods or tired smiles exchanged, all people going to work and coming home. There was comfort in that predictability. You could almost set your watch by the way the cars moved and the people moved with them. New faces were rare, and I found a strange reassurance in that. Then one night, that routine was broken. It was winter, around 10 or 11 p.m., dark and bitterly cold outside. I had sprinted to catch the train, out of breath, heart racing not just from exertion, but from the biting wind that whipped my face. The car was packed, of course, as it always was at that hour, but instead of finding a seat, I ended up standing by the doors. 2 men my age were talking nearby, laughing quietly, leaning slightly on the poles. I nodded at them politely, and then I noticed him. He was different in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. A man in his late 50s, balding, gray hair peeking out in thin strands. He wore a Hawaiian shirt, slightly unbuttoned, khakis, and a belt that looked just a little too tight for his frame. A yellowed business key card was clipped to his pocket on a retractable wire. But it wasn't the clothes or the age, it was his presence, his eyes. They were deep-set, downturned, almost mournful, with a strange, pouting expression that gave him a permanently sorrowful look. And yet, when the 2 younger men laughed at something one of them said, he joined in, loudly, unnaturally, almost aggressively. He wasn't part of the conversation, but he was absorbing it as if trying to internalize their joy for himself. It was off. I watched him without meaning to. Something in the way he examined the 2 men, lingering just a beat too long on their faces, made my stomach knot. His gaze wasn't casual. It was deliberate, calculated, almost predatory in the quietest way. I didn't move. I didn't want to, but the train ride stretched on, and the more I observed him, the more I realized how out of place he was. Normally, details like this fade from memory, but his mannerisms were impossible to forget. The way he tilted his head slightly, the way he subtly mirrored their movements, the way his mouth stayed in that faint pout while his eyes darted, scanning. It was uncanny. When their stop finally arrived, he followed them out for a few steps, but then he saw me. My heart nearly stopped. For a split second, something in his expression changed. His sorrowful eyes lit up with what could only be described as pure joy. Childlike, unrestrained. The kind of happiness you see in someone who's gotten exactly what they've been waiting for. And then, he froze. He didn't step off the train. He didn't move. It was like he was rooted to the spot, concrete binding his feet to the floor. That's when I knew, in a bone-deep way, that he would follow me. I didn't panic. At least, I tried not to. I'm a fairly big guy, not easily intimidated, but this wasn't about size or strength. This was about intentions. The way he had looked at me, joyful yet deliberate, made me certain he wasn't just another harmless late-night traveler. When my stop came, he followed. Not close, not yet, but enough. I stepped onto the platform and began walking at a normal pace. Not fast, not slow, just regular. I kept my headphones in, music loud enough to mask the sounds around me but not completely blocking my awareness. And there he was, matching my pace. It was unnatural, almost mechanical, the way he kept the same distance, always slightly behind but never letting me out of sight. I thought of every possible escape, but my options were limited. No stores were open, no taxis, no one was around. The street was nearly deserted, cold wind cutting through the dark night. The hill leading up to my house loomed ahead, a small incline, but enough that I hoped it would slow him down. As I approached it, I quickened my pace, subtly, almost testing him, and he kept up, matching me step for step, stride for stride, as if he had been planning this exact route all along. At the bottom of the hill, I sprinted. Adrenaline surged through my veins like fire. I didn't stop until I reached my backyard fence. Throwing myself over it in one smooth motion, I landed in darkness, crouching low, heart hammering, barely daring to breathe. My back door was a sliding door, locked from the inside, so my only choice was to wait, to hide. And wait I did. Through the fence slats, under the dim glow of a streetlight, I watched him. He climbed the hill slowly, scanning the street, looking for any sign of me. Then I saw it, his eyes. Gone was the sorrow, gone was the childlike joy. Now there was rage, cold, seething, calculated rage. He lingered for what felt like hours, pacing under the light, before finally disappearing into the night. The next day, I called the police and filed a report. I also changed my commuting routine completely. Instead of taking the direct route, I hopped from train to train, 3 or 4 times, hoping he would continue on the main line and I could avoid him entirely. I never saw him again. But the story didn't end there. I changed my routine forever. I became hyper-aware of every unfamiliar face, every lingering gaze. Even now, years later, when I'm alone at night, waiting for a train, or walking down a quiet street, I still check over my shoulder. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I feel those eyes on me, hidden in the dark, watching, waiting. Because some people are out there, and you will never know what's behind their eyes. Do you want me to do that next? It was a chilly October night, the kind that makes the air feel sharp in your lungs, the kind where every leaf that scrapes across the pavement sounds like footsteps. My friend Alexandria and I had agreed to babysit together for the Doyle's children. Their parents were attending a company dinner party and wouldn't be home until late. At first, it felt cozy, safe. The Doyle house was warm, lit with the soft glow of lamps and decorated for Halloween. Paper pumpkins taped to the windows, a bowl of candy on the counter, and little plastic ghosts dangling from the stair railing. It felt like the kind of night you could relax in, even with the responsibility of watching the kids. Alexandria and I settled into the living room with them, flipping on the TV to the 31 Days of Halloween marathon. The kids were curled up on the couch with blankets, their eyes wide at the flashing scenes on screen, half scared, half thrilled. Alexandria and I had even made hot apple cider for everyone, the smell of cinnamon and cloves filling the air. It was, by all accounts, a typical fall night. Until the doorbell rang, the sharp chime echoed through the house, cutting through the laughter and cozy atmosphere like a knife. I frowned, set down my mug, and got up to answer it. Alexandria looked at me over the rim of her cup. "Probably trick-or-treaters," she said. But when I opened the door, no one was there. The porch light buzzed faintly above me, illuminating the empty front step and the quiet street beyond. The night was still, the air heavy with the smell of damp leaves. I leaned out, scanning the shadows, expecting to see kids running off, giggling from a prank. But the street was empty. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. A little unsettled, I shut the door and locked it, brushing off the unease that crept into my chest. Probably just ding-dong ditchers, I told myself. Kids being kids. 5 minutes passed. The cider was cooling in our mugs. The kids were whispering nervously at the TV. And just as I was beginning to relax again, the doorbell rang. This time I moved quickly, my pulse quickening. I was determined to catch whoever was messing with us. I yanked the door open, ready to shout into the night. Again, no one. But something was different this time. As I glanced down, I noticed the edge of the welcome mat was slightly lifted. Something was tucked underneath. My hands trembled as I bent down and pulled it free. It was a note. The handwriting was messy, jagged, almost rushed. "You'll have to be quicker than that," it read. "How about you check upstairs?" For a moment, my brain refused to process the words. Then slowly, I lifted my head and looked back inside. That's when I saw it. On the landing at the top of the stairs, just beyond the reach of the light, a shadow moved. A tall, dark figure that lingered for only a heartbeat before slipping out of sight. My heart froze in my chest. No one was upstairs. Everyone, Alexandria, the kids, they were all in the living room with me. I didn't think, I just acted. I bolted into the living room, grabbed Alexandria by the arm, and hissed, "We have to go!" Now she looked startled, confused. But when she saw my face, she didn't argue. I scooped up the kids, dragging them toward the door, their little bodies heavy and panicked as they asked what was happening. Out on the porch under the harsh glow of the light, I shoved the note into Alexandria's hands. Her face drained of color as she read it. "Upstairs," she whispered. "I saw someone," I choked out. "On the landing. There's someone in the house." We didn't wait. We sprinted to the next door neighbor's house, pounding on their door until they answered. I must have looked wild-eyed, clutching the kids and shaking as I explained what had just happened. The neighbors ushered us in immediately, locking the door behind us. The police came quickly. Their flashlights sliced through the Doyles' darkened house, beams of white bouncing across the walls as they investigated. When the officers finally returned, their faces were grave. They told us they had found evidence in the upstairs bedroom: duct tape, rope, a steak knife, laid out deliberately like someone had been preparing. They also found the back window forced open, the frame splintered, the lock broken. The words the officer spoke next will haunt me forever. "You kids were lucky. If you hadn't gotten out when you did, we'd be looking at a very different situation tonight." The Doyles' parents came home earlier than expected after being contacted. When they arrived, the horror on their faces was indescribable. They packed up their children immediately and went to stay with family who lived 20 minutes away. Alexandria and I ended up back at my house, but neither of us slept a wink. We sat together in silence, the note lying between us on the table, its jagged letters burned into our memories. That was 5 years ago, but still, on cold autumn nights, when the wind rattles against the windows and the world outside feels too quiet, my mind goes back to that evening, to the sound of the doorbell echoing through the Doyles' house, to the shadow on the landing, to the note that told me exactly where to look. And I wonder, what if we hadn't left the house? What if I had gone upstairs? What if we had been just a little slower? The thought chills me every single time. I thank God every day that we escaped. But deep down, I know we weren't just lucky, we were spared. And I still don't know why. For the past year, Deb had been emotionally manipulated by someone she worked with remotely through a nurse chat center. I'm writing this because I'm concerned about Deb, and I'm not alone. There are several of us. We've all heard different pieces of the story, and we've all seen the aftermath. Deb worked for a suicide crisis line as a psychiatric nurse. That in itself should have made her more immune to being manipulated. She was trained to detect trauma responses, to listen carefully, and to guide people towards stability. But this wasn't a normal case. This was something else entirely. It started slowly. Deb would take late-night chats, sometimes back-to-back, and she began noticing some of the regulars. One night it was a lonely woman named Stephanie who said her son had died in a school shooting. The next it was an old man named Raymond who said he lived in a nursing home and wanted to end his life. Then it was a single father who just lost his wife in childbirth and couldn't bond with his newborn. Each story was harrowing. Each one felt real. Unique writing styles, distinct personalities, varied traumas. Some were barely coherent in their grief. Others were charming, intellectual, inquisitive. But slowly, over months, they all gravitated toward Deb. Always Deb. The chat spilled over onto WhatsApp. Deb, believing these were real people in need of help, started taking her role home with her. She drank red wine during these late-night talks. She watched crime documentaries between messages. Sometimes she cried when she logged off. She thought she was saving lives. This person, or entity, began to condition Deb emotionally. It wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was psychological torture masquerading as dependence. If she didn't respond, a child might die. If she missed a message, someone would overdose. The messages grew darker, more urgent. Sometimes she would get 10 or more different people contacting her in a single night. What Deb didn't know was that it was all one person. She started losing sleep. She began isolating herself. Her apartment grew darker and more cluttered. She rarely went out unless it was for groceries or work. Those of us who knew her noticed how quiet she had become, how every ding from her phone would make her flinch. The first red flag came from the tech guy at the chat center. He reached out and asked if Deb had noticed anything unusual. At first, she thought he was talking about glitches or spam. But then he asked if she realized that almost every chat she took over the past few months had come from the same IP address. It wasn't just a strange coincidence. The person wasn't just stalking her. They had gotten into the system. Every person Deb had spent hours talking to, the grieving parents, the lonely teens, the suicidal veterans, they were all the same individual. Deb collapsed. She went pale and cried until she was dry heaving. She filed her resignation that week, took emergency medical leave, moved out of state, and began therapy. She was absolutely shattered. But she wasn't done suffering. Deb started drinking heavily, more than the red wine. She'd black out, disappear for days, send garbled voice messages to people she barely knew. She stopped answering our calls. Eventually, she joined a weight management group where I met her. That's when she told me everything. Like a confession she had been holding in for months. She said she still wakes up at night hearing the WhatsApp message tone. She said sometimes she dreams of answering a chat window and seeing all the fake names lined up, waiting, their typed messages appearing one after the other, begging, blaming. She said she thinks this person is a psychopath, that they watched her, fed off her, enjoyed watching her crack. Maybe Deb watches too many crime shows, but honestly, after everything she told me, I'm not so sure she's wrong. It wasn't just deception. It wasn't just loneliness. This was targeted, persistent, and methodical. She once said, "It felt like he knew me better than I knew myself, like he was writing roles based on what I feared the most." And that's what still haunts her. She quit all social media, changed her number, deleted WhatsApp, but she still jumps at every unknown number. She won't use her real name on any forms, and she keeps asking me to tell her if I ever see anyone strange watching her. She's better now, somewhat. She's lost weight, she's sobered up, and she's making friends again. But there's still this part of her that's always looking over her shoulder. If you or someone you know has been through something similar, Deb would want to hear from you. She still feels deeply ashamed for believing in something that wasn't real, for caring too much, for letting herself be pulled in. But she didn't deserve it. None of us do. If you ask me whether I think this person was a psychopath or just lonely, my answer is both. Some lonely people spiral inward. Others reach outward and infect. This one? He infected Deb's life like a virus. She survived. But some nights I can still see her looking at the shadows, wondering if the next chat, the next number, might be him again. So no, this isn't a traditional scary story, but it's real, and it's still happening to someone who deserves peace. And I think that's scary enough. I grew up in eastern Kentucky, deep in the hills near the Red River Gorge, a place where the trees are so thick you can't see the sky in places, and the land itself feels older than time. Our house sat at the edge of a gravel road, surrounded by forests that creaked and whispered with every breeze. It was the kind of place where things felt alive, not in the comforting way, but in the way that made your skin crawl when you were alone. I was about 11 years old, small for my age, and often brushed off by my older siblings. Still, I loved playing outside, especially in the summer when the lights seemed to stretch forever. But on this particular day, sunny, bright, and quiet, I hesitated. I don't know why. Normally, I would have burst out the door and thus straight onto my big wheel, racing up and down the gravel driveway like it was my own little highway. But something was different. Something gnawed at me. I asked my brother and sister if they'd come out with me. Weird thing was, I never did that. I always went out alone. But this time, something in my chest, something tight and cold, made me want someone with me. Of course, they all shrugged me off, busy with whatever kids in the early 90s did inside when the sun was shining. So I went out alone. Our side door opened directly onto the gravel driveway. The rocks crunched under the wheels of my big wheel as I started pedaling. The air was still, unnaturally still. No birds chirping, no breeze. Just that strange kind of silence that makes your ears ring a little. I rolled slowly, maybe 50 feet or so, when something hit me like a wall. Pure, skin-prickling fear. No sound, no warning. Just a sudden, overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. My hands tightened around the handlebars. My chest felt hollow. I didn't know where the fear was coming from, only that it had swallowed me whole. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the plastic handlebars, trying to breathe slowly to calm whatever was flaring in my gut. Then, without really thinking, I turned my head to the right. There, about 100 feet away, was the old fruit cellar built into the hillside. It was a squat stone structure with a gabled roof that sloped sharply down to meet the dirt of the hill. That slope created a dark, wedge-shaped gap, a narrow triangular space between the earth and the underside of the roof. I'd never found it creepy before. It was just where we kept the pump for our well, and sometimes jars of canned vegetables. But today, something was watching me, tucked deep in that shadowy gap, far back where the light didn't reach. I saw a face. It wasn't human. It had the shape of a large primate, like a gorilla maybe, but somehow wrong. The eyes were the worst part, not glowing red like in movies, but black and glassy, with shining pupils that caught the sunlight in a way that made my stomach turn. The space beneath the roof was tiny, barely large enough for a medium-sized dog. There's no way a body could have fit in there. Just the head, staring, unblinking, hidden in the cool shadow as if the darkness belonged to it. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stared, locked in a silent war of eye contact with something that shouldn't have existed. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stared. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there frozen, then slowly lowered my forehead again to the handlebars, hiding my face from it, trying to convince myself I hadn't really seen what I saw. I counted in my head, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then turned back expecting, hoping it would be gone. But it was still there, its eyes glinting coldly in the dark. That broke me. I didn't look back again. I jumped off the big wheel and bolted for the house, screaming like my skin was on fire. I yelled something about a gorilla head under the fruit cellar, words that even I knew sounded stupid as they left my mouth, but it was the only way I could describe what I'd seen. My mom, dad, and siblings rushed out, following me down the driveway, expecting to see something, anything. But of course, it was gone. They laughed, rolled their eyes, told me I was imagining things. My brother even joked that I'd probably just seen our old black lab in the shadows and scared myself silly. But I knew what I'd seen, and it wasn't a dog. I made them walk with me to the exact spot where I'd been on the driveway. I pointed to the exact wedge under the roof. I stood there again and stared at that gap, trying to make sense of how anything could have fit there. But it was empty, just damp dirt and cobwebs, nothing else. And yet, the feeling lingered. Even now, all these years later, I remember every detail. The sharp smell of gravel dust in the hot air, the way the plastic grips of the big wheel felt under my palms, the way those shining black eyes seemed to catch something deeper than just sunlight, like they were reflecting something alive. I never went near that fruit cellar again, not even in daylight. Something watched me that day, something that didn't need to move or speak or breathe, something that could sit in the dark, folded into impossibly small spaces, and wait. And to this day, every time I think about it, that same silence returns. That strange, suffocating silence where even the birds fall quiet, where the air itself feels like it's holding its breath. Maybe I was just a scared kid with an overactive imagination. But maybe some things in the dark really are watching, and sometimes they let you see them. And that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories. If you did, don't forget to drop a comment with your favorite one, hit that like button, and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales coming your way. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.